For about 70 years, the world operated under a set of rules that were largely written and upheld by the United States. Then, in a pretty dramatic reversal, America declared it was putting itself first. This is the story of that seismic shift, the actions it inspired, and the altered world it's leaving in its wake, all according to those who watched it happen.
And this quote from the Brookings Institution really gets to the heart of it. For decades, the United States was seen as the architect, the guarantor of the international order. But what happens when the architect decides to just walk off the job? The America First doctrine put that very question to the test.
So what is America First in practice? It's a fundamental reframing of national interest. This was a radical departure from that post-war idea that, a rising tide lifts all boats. The new thinking was that America needed to prioritize its own boat first, even if it meant rocking the others. And this philosophy wasn't just theoretical. It drove a series of concrete and truly world-altering action.
So how did this new doctrine translate into action? Well, the most visible and immediate changes came in the form of a series of really high-profile withdrawals from international agreements that had for years been the bedrock of global cooperation.
First up was the exit from the Paris Agreement on Climate, and this was a move that sent shockwaves around the entire globe. To its supporters, it was a necessary step to protect American industry from what they saw as unfair burdens. But to its critics, it was a reckless abdication of responsibility in the face of a planetary crisis.
The geopolitical fallout was immediate. And this wasn't just about emissions targets. As the Council on Foreign Relations pointed out, the U.S. withdrawal created a power vacuum on the world stage, and other countries, especially China, were seen as being pretty quick to step into that void, expanding their own influence in global governance.
Next came the withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal. Now, this was a complex and controversial agreement, years in the making. It involved this delicate balancing act, lifting crippling economic sanctions in exchange for verifiable promises from Iran to dramatically curb its nuclear ambitions.
And this is the exact outcome that critics of the withdrawal feared. The analysis in this report concluded that by pulling out, the U.S. actually prompted Iran to restart its nuclear enrichment, leaving the nation closer to a weapon. Now, on the other side, supporters of the move argued the deal was flawed from the start and that a tougher stance was the only way to truly prevent a nuclear Iran.
The third major exit was from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. This thing was a behemoth of a trade deal, a sprawling agreement among 12 nations that would have rewritten the rules for nearly 40% of the global economy. It was largely seen as a counterbalance to China's rising economic power.
And this is a classic example of what analysts call the law of unintended consequences. The Brookings Institution argued that by trying to protect American interests through withdrawal, the U.S. may have inadvertently handed a major strategic and economic victory to its chief global rival.
But maybe the most dramatic and consequential application of the America First doctrine was the decision to end America's longest war, bringing the 20-year conflict in Afghanistan to a definitive final close.
This timeline, it really tells a story of a rapid and decisive withdrawal. That 2020 deal, signed directly with the Taliban, and this is critical, it excluded the Afghan government. It set the stage for the swift and total collapse of the U.S.-backed regime just 1 year later.
So by the start of 2021, this small contingent of troops was all that was left of what was once a massive U.S. military presence. And they were tasked with this near impossible job of holding the line as the country and its security forces were just teetering on the brink of collapse.
Now, this data tells a fascinating and really complex story. It shows that even as the U.S. was publicly negotiating for peace, it was simultaneously waging war with an intensity not seen in a decade. This contrast, it raises some serious questions about the strategy that was underpinning the final years of the conflict.
The result was a house of cards, and it came tumbling down with breathtaking speed. In the summer of 2021, the Afghan government and the National Army that the United States had spent 2 decades and billions of dollars building, it just melted away.
The scenes from Kabul were just heartbreaking and chaotic, culminating in that deadly attack at the airport during the frantic final evacuation. But for some, the withdrawal, however painful it was seen as the necessary end to a long, costly, and unwinnable war.
This staggering sum, it was meant to build a new Afghanistan, a modern, more stable state. It represents this immense investment of treasure, all aimed at transforming a nation. And in the end, that entire project collapsed right as the final U.S. plane departed.
But the story of America First isn't just one of withdrawal and retreat. It's also a story of bold and often controversial new diplomatic initiatives that prioritize direct, bilateral deal-making over those traditional multilateral approaches.
A prime example was the direct diplomacy with North Korea. This was a move that just stunned the world. For decades, sitting U.S. presidents had refused to meet with the leaders of what was considered a pariah state. But the America First doctrine was all about breaking with tradition.
To critics, the summits were little more than a photo op, a propaganda victory for a brutal regime that yielded no real progress on denuclearization. But supporters argued that direct, top-level engagement was the only way to break that dangerous cycle of provocation and crisis.
Another signature initiative was the Abraham Accords. This was a diplomatic earthquake, a redrawing of the political map of the Middle East. For decades, the Arab world had been largely united in its opposition to Israel. The Abraham Accords completely shattered that consensus, normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab nations.
This was a bold and controversial move. To its supporters, it was a pragmatic way to build a new coalition of moderates in the region focused on shared economic and security interests. To its critics, as this analysis notes, it was a betrayal of the Palestinian people, built by deliberately bypassing their long-standing demands.
So, what does it all add up to? The withdrawals, the new deals, the end of the war. What is the cumulative effect? The answer, according to the sources, is a world remade, a global stage in a profound state of flux.
And this is the question that hangs over everything we've talked about. For better or for worse, the world has been fundamentally changed by America's decision to alter its traditional role as a global leader, and the consequences are still unfolding.
Analysts describe two primary potential outcomes. The first is that we see a new era of competition, where a rival power like China steps in to fill the void and write the new rules. The second possibility? That no single power can fill that void, leading to a world with no clear rules at all.
And that second possibility leads to this really stark assessment from the Brookings Institution. The fear expressed here is that without a power able and willing to underwrite the global system, we could see a return to the kind of great power competition that led to so much bloodshed in the 20th century.
The America First doctrine offered one answer to this question, but the debate it kicked off is far from over. The questions it raised about the costs of leadership, the nature of national interest, and America's place in the world are more relevant than ever. And how they're answered? Well, that's going to define the 21st century.